In 2020, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery sparked a global protest movement against police brutality, social injustice, and systemic racism that has been affecting Black people worldwide, especially in the United States of America. This struggle against the mistreatment of Black bodies and the fight for freedom and dignity is not new. The arrival of Europeans on the shores of Africa disrupted the African way of life and profoundly altered the course of history. For more than 200 years, Africans were enslaved in Europe and the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade. Despite being outgunned, our ancestors fought back during slave raids and in detention, and some captives refused to be enslaved and took their own lives by jumping into the ocean or observing a hunger strike. According to the Abolitionist Project, over 50 major mutinies occurred on slave ships in the Middle Passage between 1699 and 1865. Our ancestors fought back on the plantations. Harriet Tubman, Brefu, Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, Gabriel Prosser, Toussaint Louverture, countless other revolutionaries and everyday people, including African Americans who fought in the Civil War, showed us that our ancestors never accepted their servitude and mistreatment, and that they longed for freedom and dignity. After legal slavery ended, while people of African descent in the United States were experiencing segregation, lynching, and other forms of racial discrimination, Europe divided Africa into small colonies at the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. This was the starting point of the colonization of Africa. Facing similar inhumane treatment, Black people in Africa and the Americas decided to work together to liberate themselves from oppression. From 1900 to 1945, Black leaders including W.E.B. Du Bois, Marcus Garvey, Henry Sylvester Williams, Kwame Nkrumah, and Jomo Kenyatta decided to organize several conferences during which they discussed ways to achieve total freedom. These important Pan-African gatherings, along with sustained political and social activism, led to the independence of Ghana in 1957, with Kwame Nkrumah as its first president. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. participated in the celebration of Ghana's independence that year and envisioned Black people enjoying freedom in the United States. Meanwhile, segregation and racial discrimination were also being challenged in the United States by modern civil rights organizations and leaders. Martin Luther King Jr., Fannie Lou Hamer, Stokely Carmichael, Ella Baker, Malcolm X, Rosa Parks, and countless other people whose names we will never know sacrificed in the name of freedom. Organizations like SCLC, SNCC, the NAACP, and others mobilized people to resist, march in the street, sit in at diners in places where they would not be served, and refuse to spend their money at businesses where they were not treated with dignity. They also fought in the courts. Black and white children were not allowed to go to the same schools. The schools were unequal, and Black schools didn't get the same quality books and resources as white schools. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in the landmark case Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka that racial segregation of children in public schools was unconstitutional. The laws changed, but changing people's minds did not come easily. Brave young people were on the front lines as they had to be the first African American students to integrate the schools and tried to learn in environments where many white students, families, teachers, and community members mistreated them. They courageously persisted. There were more successes. In Montgomery, Alabama, even though they paid their fare, Black people had to give up their seats to white people and move to the back of the bus. Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat and sparked a bus boycott in 1955. Black people organized, and for a whole year they refused to ride the bus, choosing to walk or carpool to work and the places they had to go. Black taxi drivers even charged low fares to boycotters. A year later, the discriminatory policy was declared unconstitutional. Segregation of public transportation was no longer allowed. Black people could sit anywhere they wanted on city buses. Resistance led to changes in laws. In 1964, Congress passed a Civil Rights Act that banned discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin, as well as discrimination in public accommodations, including courthouses, parks, restaurants, theaters, sports arenas, and hotels. A year later, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which banned discriminatory voting practices, which continued to prevent many Black people from performing one of their most important rights and duties as American citizens. Resistance continued and evolved. In the 1960s and 70s, the Black Power movement emerged. The movement had a global influence and sparked the Black Power revolution in Trinidad and Tobago. Groups like the Black Panthers promoted self-protection, self-determination, and self-reliance. Around the same time, there was a surge of Black pride, an explosion of love of Black identity, heritage, history, culture, and self, known as Black is Beautiful or Black consciousness spread around the world. Muhammad Ali proclaimed to the world that he was pretty, natural hair reigned, and Black people celebrated their own story, style, and beauty. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud was the anthem, and Black people made sure their issues were front and center. Black people loving themselves is an act of resistance. More African and Caribbean countries became independent in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, while many of these nations like Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, and Mali fought for independence peacefully. Many other countries such as Algeria, Kenya, and Angola waged bloody conflicts against the colonizers to achieve their freedom. While Black people advanced and excelled in employment, business, education, politics, entertainment, and many aspects of life, the struggle continued in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. Disinvestment in urban neighborhoods, discrimination, police brutality, and oppression on many fronts persisted. The world stood with Black South Africans to topple the racist system of apartheid. Nelson Mandela, anti-apartheid revolutionary, became the first president of the new South Africa in 1994. But the more things changed, the more they stayed the same. Despite decades of action, inequalities in social, economic, and justice systems continue. As the list of names of Black people unjustly killed by police who were not held accountable grew, so did the Black Lives Matter movement. Then in 2020, the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor at the hands of police and vigilantes ignited a movement for social change that touched all corners of the world. Even during a global pandemic, Black people and their allies continue to push for equitable policing, legal reforms, and just economic policies. Black communities are also taking power into their hands and devising their own solutions for change. With a great sense of purpose, Black people are exercising one of the most fundamental rights, the power of the vote. We recognize that our ancestors held the vote so dear and fought and sacrificed for it, and it still matters. The road to freedom has been long. Across centuries, Black people have resisted oppression. Each generation builds on our proud legacy and continues to create a world where we live in total liberation.